saw untruths, words that might well damage the beliefs of Orthodox Jews. Its author had to be stopped spreading his apicausis. So began the first Jacob's affair. As the oldest child of the author and a teenager at the time, I was encouraged to talk at this Limmud on the affair from a very personal perspective, since we are in the 50th year of the founding of the New London Synagogue. As Rabbi Wolpe said at last year's Limmud, it is good for a child when his father is attacked, but even better if he agrees with his father. So I am very pleased to have this opportunity to discuss life with Louis. The next hour is not a history lesson. In fact, I'll be moving all over the place with my thoughts. For those that have scant or no recollection of events, or were born years after, suffice it to say that the so-called Jacob's affair rocked Anglo Jewry. The basis of the controversy was supposedly theological. My father, being open to ideas, very widely read, a Manchester Yeshiva Bocher, studying at Gateshead Kollel, and then at London University, he discovered for himself that Torah had a history. Torah was and is being revealed through people, not just to people, at one point in time. These are some of the press cuttings of the time. These thoughts were contained in We Have Reason to Believe. It was intended to answer vital religious questions that his New West End United Synagogue group raised. It was passionately extolling what were assumed then to be Jewish Orthodox religious values. It gave people positive reasons to believe and practice Judaism. Unfortunately, the chief Rabbi Israel Brody and his Beth Din saw Rabbi Jacob's thoughts as apicausis, heresy, beyond the pale, and had no place at all in Orthodoxy. This all blew up after Rabbi Jacobs had left the New West End Synagogue to become moral tutor at Jews College with a promise of becoming principal. After a year or so, Rabbi Jacobs resigned when his intended appointment as principal was vetoed, supposedly because of his views. Rabbi Jacobs thus had no job. There was talk of the family emigrating to America or even South Africa, but several supporters, including myself, I wanted to stay here, wanted him to be in England. They set up the Society for the Study of Jewish Theology, that, by the way, later merged with the Society for Jewish Study and still meets once a month at Joseph's bookshop in Temple Fortune. Rabbi Chaim Pearl took over the New West End pulpit when my dad left. He was there only for a short time when he departed for the States. The honorary officers of the New West End wanted my dad back as their rabbi. He was very pleased to accept. But the chief rabbi and his dayanim would have none of that and revoked Rabbi Jacob's practicing certificate. Now, just a note on the side. The US owns the bricks and mortar of their 70-plus synagogues. It also has locked in affiliates in the UK and the Commonwealth, running them as a corporate brand. The chief rabbi has always been the sole ecclesiastical authority to whom all of his rabbis report. The US has a defined hierarchy of authority and rule books. Employee rabbis just cannot speak their minds without recrimination if what they say is out of sync with the boss who verifies their appointment in the first place. That, I'm afraid, is still the position today, and why rabbis are loath to stick their necks out as their very livelihoods are at stake. So back to the New West End. And the year 1963. A huge row erupted, with caretaker wardens sent by the US head office to occupy the New West End. They forbade Rabbi Jacobs using their US building. He was a trespasser, in spite of the fact that the congregation had just opened a magnificent Herbert Samuel Hall. That was paid for by members, with much cajoling from my dad to the congregation to raise the funds for it. The result was that over half of the members of the New West End left en masse, even giving up their burial rights, and started the New London Synagogue. An amazing coincidence came about with the acquisition of the Abbey Road Synagogue. as the US, that's actually that's the US then, sorry. There it is, at the Abbey Road Synagogue, as the US had just moved to a new building round the corner. As a delightful moving in present, we found that they had axed the rabbi's seat and the warden's seats. The whole series of events happened over a couple of years leading up to 1964 with the new London formation. Anyway, that's a little background. The rest of this talk can't be objective. It's about my father, it's about myself and my involvement over the 50 years. So I think I should say a few words about myself. I am not a rabbi. I've never had the ability nor aspiration to be one. Actually, my big passion was skiffle, blues and rock, believe it or not. With school friends, we started a band called the Steamrollers. We're still playing. I had to decide whether to play on Shabbat or play just as a hobby. It was a no-brainer. I just could not go down a non-religious route. Although, talking about brains, I contracted meningitis when I was 17. The week after we auditioned and had a big break with the manager of Brian Poole and the Tremlos. He wanted us to do a gig, but I was in hospital, almost dead. Maybe somewhere warning me about the dangers of alcohol, drugs and women. Actually, I did it anyway, actually, my mum encouraged me with the music as she'd given up a singing career because her family felt that it was not a job for a Jewess. In the end, I followed a career in sales and marketing, mostly within publishing and the print industry. And for the last 17 years, I've run an internet-based software and print business. The technology and pace of developments have well and truly kept me busy, excited and motivated, although it's been hard to compartmentalise. I must have a sip, sorry. To compartmentalise my work and communal involvement. However, it's always been helpful to have the facilities to create publicity and information collateral for community involvement, like that poster. That started with the children's service at New West End Synagogue, and then at my secondary school, where I was one of just 3 boys out of around 100 Jews willing and sort of able to take the Jewish assembly services. I attended Jewish youth study groups, actually 11 schools, but 12 altogether, because my dad lectured there, as this picture shows. That's me on the very left-hand side, my dad's in the middle somewhere. This was the year before I actually joined study groups. I became national chairman of that wonderful institution, and also forming another group, one here, the Rubins. We might give you our song later. Yeah, should we, Ian? Fancy it? My kids also attended, but alas, it is no more, having been taken over by the United Synagogue. Study group's demise started at a reunion when the girls were told not to join in with the singing or the dancing. A far cry from our study group days when there was no mechitza and no thought of girls not singing. Coincidentally, in 1963, at the height of the affair, Rabbi Brady, the chief rabbi, visited our Morton Hall summer school. As chairman, I had to introduce him, so tried to deflect my pent-up criticism of his treatment of my dad. I thus had a go at him for making me stand for 45 minutes at my bar mitzvah with a crick in my neck, looking up like that. This resulted from looking up to his preaching from the very lofty New West End pulpit. I explained why I hadn't forgiven him, and so avoided mentioning the controversy. He took it in good humour. Nowadays, our rabbi, Jonathan Wittenberg, keeps the kids standing for 3 minutes. They don't know how lucky they are. My continuing community involvement led me at Manchester University to becoming chairman of JSOC and vice of IUJF. That's now UJS. Preferring furthering students' interest to studying, I was also still into music with my group, Robbie Spockage and the Fundamentalists. I loved rock and roll and got elected Vice President and Social Secretary of the University Union, booking bands such as Cream, Georgie Fame and even Jimi Hendrix. I have to admit that at my last year at university, I did little work, being totally absorbed with the union. I was really worried about letting my parents down by coming home degreeless. But as luck would have it, as part of Rag Week, I organised a hora breaker in the heart of Manchester. Just after the pubs shut, I noticed a chap painting a statue with the paint that we used for drawing the circle for the dancing. I rushed over, grabbed the paint pot and brush, and seconds later, an arm on my shoulder. Hello, 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 I saw you painting the statue. Come with me to the police station. It's a long story, but I was arrested, spent the nights in the cell, and appeared before the magistrates and then the stipendiary, as the police always like to make an example case against the students' ragweek. Anyway, we found a cab driver witness, the charge was dropped, and the policeman reprimanded. The union held my case and pleaded with my faculty that due to my court ordeal, they should be sympathetic to my degree result. And so I scraped through with an ordinary degree. I'm telling you, it was a real godsend. It wasn't good, admittedly, but I can't tell you, it was a fantastic relief to go home to my parents with actually a degree, or that picture anyway. The New London started in 1964. That was the year that I started university. You can imagine the incredible atmosphere. Not only was the music of the time all-consuming, but Jewishly there was so much activity and excitement over the controversy. Not a week passed without some comment on the radio and mainstream newspapers. As you saw, the slide at the beginning was walking through the park to the New West End Synagogue, where there were paparazzi coming all over the place, taking our picture going to synagogue. That was on the front page of the Sunday Times. But this was the first time that the UK community was open, warts and all, to the outside world. It was, after all, the 60s, with freedom and opportunity. Even though I was brought up in a totally observant rabbi's home, I was left to make my own choices. My dad rarely pushed me, but was always there to answer questions in his smoke-filled study, where he spent almost all his waking hours whilst at home. I sometimes used to sneak in and nick his fag ends to have a puff. Later on, when I asked him about smoking, he said that yeshiva life was so severe that the only pleasure that Bockers had was to smoke a cigarette. He smoked almost until he died. I gave it up when I was 30. I felt the dynamism of Judaism and saw little conflict in partaking in modern culture, however much that seemed to some quite unholy. I was incredibly fortunate at study groups to have met Tirza, who's sitting over there. We married in 1967, and because of our backgrounds, Tirza's father was Rabbi Alexander Karlabach, Zichron Lavracha. He was rabbi at Belfast. Had no conflicts over our faith. We both took it for granted that rabbis' children had a responsibility, as our parents had, to serve the community. So my days were spent working and then off to some synagogue activity, study group or meeting. I was on the council of the New London, forming a young marriage group. Like many in the synagogue, especially my dad, we wanted New London's influence to be wider than amongst just ourselves. My relationship with my dad was, I suppose, similar to what many rabbis' children had with their fathers. Caring at home, but distance in public, and so encouraging self-sufficiency. Mothers invariably had to take on almost the whole child-rearing responsibilities, while also expecting to be community servants. In our case, my bubba lived with us, so we had two mums. Read into that what you will. Although, I must say, my mum loved the New Londoners. She was a mother to her community, was appropriate wording for her headstone. With my dad, they actually did know every single member, and both had incredible memories. Even years later, they were able to recall details of simchas, funerals, and meetings. My dad would even remember what people said. He not only had a photographic memory, but a video. From a very young age in Manchester, and then in London, I would go to shul with my dad. Once there, I would be looked after by a minder, so I never once sat next to my dad in shul, or indeed went anywhere near him while he was at work. Such was the formality of the times. That's one reason why I'm probably not only against mixed seating in synagogues, but against sitting next to anyone. I missed some of the early excitement at the New London as I was at university. However, it was always great to return for holidays and witness the vibrancy of the shul. By the way, we lived in Abbey Road, which was in between where we lived and the synagogue was the Abbey Road studios, and I could tell when the Beatles were there on the Shabbos walking past, so I belt out after lunch and go to the grill at the side. Nobody stopped me. I could actually hear the Beatles, and it was great because last month it was the 50th anniversary of the New London, and they hired the Abbey Road studios for an amazing event there. I also missed the memorial service for Brian Epstein that Rabbi Jacobs took with the Beatles present. Instead of castigating a generation as had the rabbi who buried Epstein, my dad paid a tribute to him by saying, "Teenagers all over the world found in him a hero. Rarely has anyone achieved so much in such short time. He has gone from us with many of his dreams still unrealised. He was a complicated character, but at his core there beats a warm and human heart." My dad always managed to say the right thing at the right time, even to me. At the time of the affair, there were several rabbis who expressed privately their support, whether or not they agreed with my dad theologically. But very few were prepared to also put their heads above the parapet. Fortunately, the sons of two that did, Reverend Isaac Levy and Rabbi Isaac Newman, are at this Limmud. Well, I don't think Julian's that well. We may try to get him on Skype. And Julian and David will be joining me tomorrow to speak on our fathers, ourselves, and the community. It must be said that rabbis generally were treated as lowly individuals. They were terribly badly paid, had to work to a strict rule book, and were subservient to honorary officers. David Newman found this letter that illustrates the attitude of Rabbi Newman speaking about the injustice to my dad. It also shows the contempt for Rabbi Jacobs that was unfortunately rife. One could understand why more rabbis were afraid to speak out, not just because they would be dismissed, but because they would be humiliated and hounded. As the late Ash Lincoln QC said, the US was then a pernicious organisation. The first 10 years of New London were heady days indeed. It tried and succeeded to be a model community based on Minhag Anglia, which was latterly described as, people have wondered what Minhag Anglia really stands for. This is one description: the decorous ways of the United Synagogue against the amateur, charismatic and neo-Hasidic sing-alongs imported from abroad. As well as well-attended services with the chazan and mixed choir, a stimulating sermon and a tremendous spirit of togetherness, the New London broke new ground with concerts in the synagogue. Even that was criticised by the chief rabbi for being an irreligious use of synagogues, and also with visiting lecturers like Heschel and the Dalai Lama, and support for social enterprises. The New London Housing Association was started by the New London and is now a huge organisation providing housing and facilities for thousands of Londoners. There were many, many incidents following the controversy, especially over marriages and conversions. Another way that the chief rabbi had hold over the community is that, for historical reasons that I'll be happy to talk about later, he has to give his consent to the appointment of marriage secretaries through the Board of Deputies. He refused it to New London. There followed a major ruck-in with the board. The New London threatened to sue if it was not granted a certificate to marry under its auspices. The certificate was granted. In 1967, Rabbi Jacobowitz became chief rabbi, and that, I'm afraid, widened the rift. He was a committed supporter of Rabbi Brody and rubber-stamped the actions of his predecessor. Under Jacobowitz, Anglo Jewry lurched further to the right. However, there was some cooperation with one or two conversions conducted by my dad at the request of the chief. My dad told me about them, but never mentioned names or details. I'm certain, though, that they were for people who always thought they were Jewish, but couldn't produce the right certificates. Now, there's been a huge amount written on how the affair has been a major feature of Anglo Jewry for over 50 years. I'm very grateful, especially to Rabbis Jeremy Gordon, Jonathan Wittenberg, Elliot Cosgrove, as well as Miri Freud-Kindell and Mark Shapiro, for their insights, discoveries and interests in both the man and the ideas. Much as I formed my own impression of my father's personality and approach, there was much they pointed out that I did not really know. One was a diary entry in June 13th, 1943, whilst he was at Manchester Yeshiva. But just a little bit about my dad before that, about his early life. My dad was brought up, by the way, as the only son of a machinist in a raincoat factory. My grandparents were very ordinary working class people born in England. They joined their local synagogue that they attended regularly, but also off to football on Shabbat afternoons, often with my dad. My Zayda wore tefillin every day was much like the Jewish folk in his street, struggling to make a living, but content with his lot. My dad got passionately switched on to religion by his legendary Hebrew school teacher, Yonah Balkin. Later he spent 7 years full-time in Manchester Yeshiva, where it, as my dad wrote, initially turned him into an insufferable little prick. I imagine my dad is an insufferable little prick. He even burned a book given as a bar mitzvah present because it supported evolution. This is true. This is how the diary went. I'm beginning to realise, get this up, I'm beginning to realise that RY, RG and GH are of a different type to me. They have been brought up on strictly orthodox lines and consequently view life in a completely different way to me. Quite a lot of what they do, they either do because of their father's training or because of what they saw and learned at the yeshivas they studied in abroad. I didn't study in a Hamish yeshiva, and for better or for worse, I must make my own path in life, as I am completely unable to model it on any known standard. 2 years later, after my parents married and I was born, my dad wrote, on receiving an invite to be assistant rabbi at Monk's in Golders Green, I have dreams of starting new movements, magazines, shiurim and so on, and I hope something comes of them. Much as he was modest in his dealings with people, helped by his sense of humour and ability to remember joke after joke and story after story, one can see that my dad had every intention of becoming a highly influential religious leader from early days. Supporting this, an earlier diary entry that was found, where he said, I would be something different from the common run of reverends, and also different from the old school of Rabbonim, and who knows if apart from enabling me to get a good job, this won't help me to do something to higher the state of Yiddishkeit in the country. He did, by the way, later on, very rarely use the term Yiddishkeit because he thought that to be somewhat irreligious. My dad had huge confidence in himself. He devoured whatever he read or was taught, and he was chuffed when in his later life he was given a copy of this letter from Rabbi Dessler in Hebrew on this Rabbi Dessler's kollel in Gateshead. You cannot imagine the value of this kollel. In it are gathered the great exemplars of the country who have fled, having learned in the great yeshivas, and amongst them are numerous true greats. There is one young man, a product of Manchester. He is the only native Anglo product. And it is no exaggeration for me to say that hitherto I have never seen an Illyri, it's a genius, of such depth. Together with the other strengths in anyone, he is a truly great one, able to plumb the depths of thought. My dad wanted to teach and preach Judaism. His dream job was to be principal of Jews College. I am also pretty sure that in spite of him never publicly or privately expressing it, it would not have taken him much persuasion to become chief rabbi. He never ever wanted to be more senior than any other rabbi, and often spoke about how the institution of chief rabbi was un-Jewish and stifling to other rabbis. He would have made many changes. For his kids, this was a lucky escape. Can you imagine being a chief rabbi's kid? With Titz and myself, we actually founded the society, Ian's a member, probably others here, the Society for the Protection of Rabbis' Children. And I would not have wanted to found another division for the protection of chief rabbis' children. The stifling of rabbis continues to this day. As Rabbi Michael Harris bravely wrote in his blog on the partnership issue, and this was only a couple of weeks ago, if rabbis are not permitted to rule on such issues in their own synagogues, we risk the infantilization of the United Synagogue Rabbinate. The situation is not helped by well-meaning lay leaders, seemingly unaware that while the concept of the local rabbi as Marei Datra, halachic leader of his domain, 'tis well rooted in our tradition, a formalised, hierarchical rabbinic structure is not. My father did gain enormous satisfaction and stimulation from being a congregational rabbi, leading the practical and pastoral side. The New London Synagogue encouraged and supported his learning and teaching, and had no qualms at all about my dad often going abroad, lecturing, spending a wonderful sabbatical at Harvard, becoming visiting professor at Lancaster, and of course writing his 50 books and hundreds of articles. Now I do want to spend a few minutes on theology, but first, to understand where he was coming from, I would like to read a short extract from his book Beyond Reasonable Doubt, where he was talking about the changes that made him interested in the world out there. I was advised to read Gershom Scholem's classical work, Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, by my teacher at UC, Dr. Siegfried Stein. Scholem's historical approach came like a shocking, at the same time invigorating cold shower. Scholem and his school showed that Kabbalah arose in Provence in the 12th century and was a series of purely human speculations, rather than, as I had innocently assumed in my sugar days, a series of communications by God revealing his true nature. Here, once again, I came to see that when the historical critical method was applied, while it did not necessarily create havoc for faith, any theological position on the role of mysticism in Jewish life could not ignore the results of scholarly research into its origins. He called his historical approach the quest. He challenged the Jew in the pew to undertake his or her own research, delighted to help on their journey, but imploring them not to follow a behavioural pattern without thinking why. His book of Jewish belief made theology accessible to all. It was clear to see that he was motivated by his incredible, insatiable thirst for truth. From his 30s onwards, he was angry and frustrated at not understanding how educated people could deny the obvious. In his introduction to We Have Reason to Believe in 1957, he wrote, "There are three pitfalls to be avoided by Jewish apologetics in its attempt to grapple with the problems raised by modern thought. It must not refuse to recognise the existence of the problem by rejecting, in the name of the traditional modern thought on all of its ways as of the day. It must not encourage that division of the mind in which incompatible ideas are allowed to exist side by side in watertight compartments, nor must it be desperately stampeded into postulating an artificial synthesis, a queer hybrid faith, which both the adherents of traditional Judaism and representative modern thinkers would repudiate. A true Jewish apologetic eschewing obscurantism, religious schizophrenia and intellectual dishonesty will be based on the conviction that all truth, the seal of the Holy One, blessed be He, is one, and that a synthesis is possible between the permanent values of truth and tradition and the best thought of the day." And now for a little theology. Rabbi Jacob's view was that the Torah did not simply drop down from heaven. At the time of the controversy, somebody said that many people believe that the Torah was given to Moses, much like the Queen gave the FA Cup at Wembley to the Venice. He distinguished between Torah min Sinai and Torah min Hashemayim, saying that you had to understand what was meant by Torah, by Sinai, Shemayim, and most of all, min, from. Fundamentalists, with apologies for using that word, but you know what it describes, will insist on the min, the from, being a direct communication between God and man, whereas indirect commands, that is God working through and with man, is more plausible. We say over the Hanukkah candles the blessing as if it was a direct command, and yet no one contends it is direct. We say, Motzi lechem min haaretz. Bread does not come directly from the ground, especially if you want it sliced. Yet we are thanking God in a very direct sense for giving us the means to sustain ourselves by reciting the bracha. He rejected fundamentalism but accepted halakha as the way humans imbibe themselves with the Spirit of God. Treading the middle path is the correct way, even though it may be full of tension and doubt. A religious person needs to question and wonder. If one stays out of harm's way, discoveries and answers will never be found. Not asking the question is not an honest way to keep out of trouble. Lincoln certainly is simply dishonest. In his much recommended small book, God, Torah, Israel, he used the very helpful concept of liberal supernaturalism to explain his approach. He wanted to avoid the term conservative, orthodox or reform, to get away from the paranoia we all have over labels. I found these notes, I'm not sure if it was written by my dad, but worth bringing to attention. Liberal supernaturalism is the attitude which affirms the being and transcendence of a personal God while remaining open to the fresh insights regarding the manner in which God becomes manifest in the universe he has created. The description of God as personal is meant to imply that there is a being by whom we were brought into existence and whom we encounter. With the advance of scientific discovery, belief in God became open to doubt. One response was the doctrine of religious naturalism. Its proponents hold that it is impossible to believe in God who creates and who intervenes in the affairs of the universe. But if God is understood as the power in the universe that makes for righteousness, if we affirm that the universe is so constituted that goodness will ultimately win out, then God is truly alive. Religious naturalism, however, does not deliver what is promised, a God capable of being worshipped. How can one sustain the conviction that there really exists a supposed power that makes for righteousness when, based on the naturalist premise itself, that power is mindless? To the fundamentalists, there's no challenge. For them, the evolutionists were wrong. The findings of the astronomers were known all along to the rabbis. The modern Jew is not comfortable with fundamentalism and its rejection of the scientific inquiry. There thus remains three attitudes on the question of God for the modern Jew: atheism, religious naturalism, or liberal supernaturalism. Liberal supernaturalism is the closest of these formulations to the Jewish tradition and the most coherent. The believer in a personal God should be ready to express his doubts and speculate on the mystery. He may then emerge from the struggle with his faith fortified and enriched. My dad always made me bemused that more modern Orthodox rabbis have not joined the theological camp, including Jonathan Sacks. Rabbi Jacob's outward relationship with Rabbi Sacks started well, but became fraught. As an interview with my dad showed, he appeared to regard the chief rabbi as someone who just did not live up to expectations. He said, from one or two remarks he has made, he seems near to my way of thinking and how people aware of the facts speak. But he will not say it. I don't know why. Perhaps it's pressure from the right wing. When my dad read of references to evolution and Homo sapiens in the chief rabbi's book, The Dignity of Difference, my dad thought, good on you, only to see the references dropped for the second edition. Now, there's little chronology in this talk, so let's go back to how the relationship with my dad developed. In 1974, after unfortunately having to move from Belsize Park to Temple Fortune, I attended Mainly Kinloss United Synagogue. Tirza and I were very uncomfortable in the US shul. We would often walk to the New London and spend the rest of Shabbat with my parents. It was a schlep, and daughter Paula was on the way. For a while, I had thought and discussed with my dad of starting, let's call it the political wing of the New London, by attempting to get on the US Council and try to make changes from within. But in the end, we decided it would be more practical to start a New London branch. With Michael Rose, who lived in Highgate and had the same distance issues as I had, we started the new North London Synagogue in Michael's home. We've just, literally last Shabbat, we celebrated our 40th anniversary of that shul. Now, unbelievably, with over 2,000 members and 1,000 children. That's more than the whole of Limmud. The early days at the new North London Synagogue were hugely exciting as we tried to create a sort of non-fundamentalist shtiebel. Rabbi Jacobs took on the mantle of our rabbi as well as at New London, although we did almost everything ourselves, grew rapidly, and 7 years later moved to our permanent address and a few years later appointed Rabbi Wittenberg. It really must be noted that due to the US being incensed at what seemed our successful bid for the manor house in Finchley, they bid against us, with the result of us having to pay double. The early days especially showed the Orthodox community to be very capable of being destructive to our process. The abusive tactics they used were awful, threatening anyone with an Orthodox background who attended our services, especially if they were to speak Davin or Leon for us. They especially used family pressure tactics. But the more we learned about our Judaism, the more secure we became in our independence. There was always the discussion about forming a movement. My dad, though, was ever optimistic that the community would see the light. He hoped it might return to the Anglo-Jewish tolerance that would accept New London and New North London's theology as an integral part, but modern Orthodox in its outlook, existing side by side. He much hoped, though, that we would become a mood and not a movement. However, as soon as there were signs of a movement that might threaten the United Synagogue, they did all they could to defend their supremacy. So any form of cooperation, unfortunately, became a vain thought. But my father's desire for an open Anglo Jewry even went as far as to work with Reform so that they would carry out their conversions in accordance with the technical details of the din, which they now do. He also worked with Rabbi Brichto in pushing for centralising conversions. It's a great shame that this failed. Now, in 1984, Jackie Chernit, who was a member of Edgware Reform Synagogue, had the blessing of her rabbi, Rabbi Michael Lee, Zichron Livracha, to set up a more traditional alternative service. Her uncle, Rabbi Chaim Pearl, as mentioned previously, became a conservative rabbi in New York. He encouraged Jackie to form a new Edgware shul under conservative lines. With friends, Jackie established the Conservative Synagogue of Northwest London. We held discussions and felt that in much thought we were similar, but in synagogue practice we were not. Indeed, we bought as an association with American ways. Although my dad had an enthusiastic dialogue with the Rabbinical Assembly in the US, it was on theology, not community. As it happened, at just that time, Masorti was starting in Israel. And it seemed natural to us to associate with that name. So started the Masorti Association, simply being a mechanism for individuals of whatever shul or none to share ideas and resources. Indeed, we anticipated gaining US members as associates. Little did we realise the now growing Orthodox opposition to Louis Jacobs' ideas. Individuals were now worried they would be attacked if there was anything to connect them to us. I know old friends that hid "we have reason to believe" and not show it on their bookshelves. I was informed just this week by an Orthodox woman who attended a friend's bar mitzvah several years ago. It was at the New North London Synagogue, that she had to swear that if she went to that bar mitzvah, she mustn't tell a soul. You may have your own stories. Later on, others wanted to form Masorti synagogues. After much debate, we decided to make the whole thing more formal and form the Assembly of Masorti Synagogues. I must admit that it took quite a lot of persuading my dad that this was the right thing to do. But I had become a fanatical Masoretist, and so had others. We really believed we could not only change the Anglo-Jewish community, but to do so while building up our own vibrant, open and challenging communities. Masorti did rapidly develop from that point. Eventually, my dad became somewhat disappointed with the direction of Masorti, even though it was the movement inspired by his views. He believed it had become over-preoccupied with relatively low-priority issues at the expense of the honest theological quest for a non-fundamentalist approach to tradition. The catalyst to this change came some years after Edgware Masorti began. It became embroiled in a bitter strife over women wearing a talit. That really, really upset my dad. This was 5 years before he died. At an interview for the JC, he said, "The thing about women wearing a talit, one side says, I'm for it, the other says, I'm opposed to it. I always said I'm opposed to both views. I haven't been working for so many years so that women can wear a talit or others to think it's a heinous offence. That's not what it's about. There's a bit too much American pragmatism. England was the home of theological thinking in the Victorian age and later. It wasn't about women priests and women bishops, but about how you understand the Bible, how things have changed in the last few years. Actually, he had no objection at all to women's service participation. He said that just because the chicken was kosher, you didn't have to eat it. He felt that concentrating on women's issues was jettisoning the seriousness of the religious challenge and was sidestepping his approach. He did recognise that for some it was an important issue, but he also witnessed people joining the sorority because they wanted non-judgmental communities with mixed seating. They also wanted to retain the comfortable traditions and familiar themes that reform was not providing. He saw these issues as reducing Masorti generally to selling itself as a worldwide popularist movement, whereas he would have preferred a UK influencing, more elitist platform. For the record, I must say that Rabbi Jacobs not only had no problem in attending egalitarian services when in the States, for instance, but he taught would-be women rabbis at the Obey, many of them now congregational rabbis, and I doubt if any would accuse him of not being an egalitarian thinker. His opposition in his community was simply that he did not want it to be embroiled in these issues. He knew that it would cause upset and concern, as in Edgware. It unfortunately continues so to do in other Masorti communities, and now in Orthodoxy, further deflecting from discussing the real underlying religious issues. Talking about women's participation, we can today see the strong hand of the United Synagogue at work. It sees any form of participation as wrong. The Partnership Minyan movement has been outlawed by the chief rabbi. So that means that over 100 rabbis in their communities cannot, however much they may want to, hold a service on these lines. Nothing changes. US rabbis have the chief as their boss and will have to adhere to his dictates, just as Rabbi Harris has said so. It does, though, seem strange that if women do want to participate in a fully traditional service, there are several Masorti shuls that offer that, whether we like it or not. It does point again to the stigma still attaching to Masorti that could provide all that these women want. Yet most still do not dare to cross the line because of stigma. The recent announcement by Masorti rabbis that gay commitment ceremonies may be held, if the individual congregations wish it, is another area where I'm certain my dad would have avoided completely at this time, as also deflecting from the raison d'etre of the movement. Indeed, I spoke to my dad just before he died in 2006, as it was in discussion in the States at that time, and I'm absolutely certain that the Masorti rabbi's statement would not have come about if he were alive. This is something I picked up from what he said in Beyond Reasonable Doubt. It's often now taken for granted in the secular Western world that homosexual relationships are made kosher because the two persons love one another. But according to Jewish values, not every ethical question can be decided on the basis of love. Unless one is to shelve 2,000 years of Jewish thought, there have to be rules governing a relationship for it to be a marriage. No liberal-minded person today would wish to make homosexual relations between consenting adults a criminal offence, nor will he fail to respect minorities in society. If Jewish standards depend on what is considered to be ethical in each particular age, this can only mean that there are no fixed Jewish ethical standards. Sure, this statement can be questioned, but other rabbis are leading Masorti now, and they have to carry the baton, make their decisions, and live with the consequences. Between 1990 and 2005, we did all we could to expand the Masorti movement by concentrating on its core values. That's when the ugly head of the Orthodox community again reared up, with many attacks on us. We held a series of thought-provoking lectures around London and the provinces. Many were met in the spirit of learning and broadening knowledge. In Manchester, where there was a real, probably still is, need for Masorti expression, mass pressure was brought to bear on those who wanted to start a synagogue. The main mover was told his kids would be immediately expelled from their Jewish school if he did not desist from his involvement. That was around 25 years after the founding of the New London. And my dad felt then, he had to say, this is 25 years ago, he said that this is 50 years before now, the day may come when there may be increasing rigidity in the community, that there will be more heresy hunting and a greater dampening down of freedom of thought. If that day ever comes, then God help the Anglo-Jewish community. 25 years later, and that's 25 years ago, there are sufficient indications that my prophecy has come to pass. To my mind, and I think it is a hugely significant point, Masorti has been accused of having most adherents that are not as committed to practice as the Orthodox, even though it considers itself to be halakhic. That's agreed. But what's the reason? The real reason is the huge pressure on enlightened, modern Orthodox people who were for 50 years cajoled and blackmailed into not having anything to do with Masorti. Thus the outcome was that the Orthodox have won. Where Masorti could have had many more committed people, they have felt it just not worth the hassle to join us. But I must say, Masorti selling itself as the writer of all communal injustices, instead of challenging Orthodoxy to put their house in order and struggle with us, has not helped. One way that Orthodoxy unjustly marginalised Masorti and used its immense bricks and mortar power was to do this was by doing everything it could to stigmatise my father and Masorti. It sneered at Masorti conversions, making it seem that we were not proper Jews. It condemned our marriages as invalid. It refused to call my dad up on the odd occasion that he would attend an Orthodox shul, even at my daughter's wedding. And it questioned the Jewish status of many in Masorti, including my daughter, who was denied entry to Jewish free school because they could not vouch that she was Jewish, and that would not allow a Masorti rabbi to speak at a funeral held on Orthodox soil. Even the last chief rabbi accused Masorti of being intellectual thieves. Since around the millennium, Masorti have, in my opinion, also been too reluctant to make waves, so bad attitudes are perpetuated. On this front, the infamous Stanmore Accords were agreed 15 years ago. As Masorti chairman at the time, I was involved in their formulation with Elkan Levy, the then president of the US. Elkan held the chief's practicing certificate, even though he was educated at the Conservative Jewish Theological Seminary. The idea was that we would confront challenging issues, but in a pleasant manner. When Elkan left, it just became a way of Masorti being hoodwinked, that it was being listened to, but in reality just set delay upon delay upon delay. Absolutely nothing, apart from superficial peace, has come about. Discrimination continues, but few are ashamed. We all know the way Limmud has been shunned in the past. My father attended several times. Rabbi Mervis attending seems a great step forward. Maybe it's time to challenge him to come clean as to what he believes, and if he actually recognises the validity of the thoughts of people like Rabbi Jacobs. Is he prepared to let his rabbis openly study with others Torah origins, history, Judaism's development and theology? It's interesting that the president of Chovavei Torah, Rabbi Asher Lopatin, who I see here, thanks very much for coming, leads the Open Orthodox movement in the USA. He spoke at Norris Lee a few weeks ago. I was happy to have attended, especially as he mentioned if it was right to sideline Rabbi Jacobs all those years ago. He said we should be about getting people in, not throwing them out. And he was not talking about the inclusiveness that everyone talks about, the inclusiveness that makes the included feel so obliged that once included, they feel that they dare not question their includers. Open Orthodoxy, however much they may stick to a fundamentalist line, is not afraid of debate and of learning from others, and we want to learn from them. So what is Anglo Jewry afraid of? My father died 8 years ago. My mum died just 8 months previously. He was rather chuffed and surprised, but very happy at receiving the honour of becoming England's greatest Jew of 350 years by a J.C. poll. In the year before, right up to a few days before he died, I recorded several videos as he was not really up to writing much. These videos are available on the louisjacobs.org site. Actually, in spite of my mum's terminal illness, and for that matter, my dad's cancer, that was not diagnosed until a week before he died, the last couple of years of my parents' lives were sad and difficult, but hugely stimulating. My younger brother, who really suffered at the time of the affairs with the threats, midnight phone calls and suspect bombs, my sister or myself were with them daily. We planned for internet technology being used to widen his audience. At the time, he decided to donate his 14,000 book library to the Oxford Centre for Hebrew and Religious Studies, so there was lots going on. My mother kept press cuttings and articles, and so there are hundreds of scrapbooks to sort out, and we are not there yet. Friends of Louis Jacobs, Friends of Louis Jacobs was set up, and as you can see, there's a poster there about it. If anybody would like to subscribe, there's free subscription. Please do so. At the Oxford Centre last year, there was a very important and exciting Visitor Scholars Programme run by Mary Foy Kendall called A Critical Exploration of Questions Raised in the Thought of Rabbi Jacobs. Friends held a programme in London alongside the Oxford one. Modern Orthodox scholars from Israel, America and elsewhere attended, such as White Weiser Livni, Mark Shapiro, James Kugel and Tamar Ross. One event was held at South Hampstead United, would you believe? To coincide with the programme, the Centre's librarian created a magnificent electronic exhibition that can be linked to from the Louis Jacobs site. It's a fascinating and detailed look at the theology and politics of the last 50 years of Anglo Jewry. Coinciding with the Oxford Symposium, Rabbi Norman Solomon's brought out his magnificent work on Torah min Hashemayim. That is an incredible thing and covers such a wide breadth. In America, Seth Farber founded the exceptional Torah.com that assumes critical Torah thought from modern Orthodox scholars. So well and truly, now being placed on the Orthodox table and through the internet are the real great theological challenges surrounding the Jacobs affair, but brought right up to date as knowledge grows and grows. It's becoming acceptable in modern Orthodoxy, even in some Haredi circles, as Mark Shapiro has made us aware of, that you remain in the fold, even if you cannot believe in the entire Torah coming directly from Sinai, you are still accepted. Orthodoxy generally just cannot avoid the issues much longer. When modern Orthodoxy admits that there is a human element to Torah, that is when people like myself may well prefer the religious stimulation coming from modern Orthodoxy rather than Masorti. As Rabbi Sperber, who is advising the partnership people on Halakha, and who spoke at Limmud 2 years ago at a session I chaired on modern Orthodoxy, he inferred that Orthodoxy follows conservative thought, but 50 years later. The first 50 years are up. Change is at last in the air, and will come from grassroots pressure with lay people loyally supporting rabbis that are prepared to say it as it is. Friends of Louis Jacobs aims to encourage debate with centrist Judaism on contemporary issues. I want to conclude by hoping that there will be an end to the sense of denial or slaying of the golden calf that Rabbi Solomon's calls the predicament of orthodoxy. British Jewry, in the historical guise of the United Synagogue, may well realise that a more open and enlightened future is in theirs as well as the whole community's interests. Surely it cannot these days be too much of a stretch of imagination to expect rabbis and teachers of all persuasions to sit down together. Why can't they challenge each other's take on Judaism and diminish the labelling that forces us all into party lines? But this afternoon I'll finish and I'll leave the last word up to Rabbi Jacobs. He often came up with little quips that would hopefully make one think. Right in the heart of religious doubt, much of my own inspiration is contained in just these few words. It is better to be vaguely right than definitely wrong. Thank you. 3 minutes if anybody wants to make any comments, questions. Francis.
I was at Jewish College for 3 years and I had the pleasure and honour and benefit of being taught by your father. And one day, in the dining room, where there were tables for 4 people, Rabbi Epstein, the principal, was at his table and no one joined him unless asked. And in came Chief Rabbi Brody and they laid another table for him. A little while later, in came Rabbi Limmud Jacobs, and they laid a 3rd table for him. And for me, that was the beginning of my end, because I felt these were the role models to whom I was supposed to aspire, but they couldn't even sit down and talk together over lunch in front of all the students. That was the symptom. But later on, the tables were turned in a different way. I was said he was at Jewish College, at Manchester University. I left Jewish College and ended up being warden of Hillel House, and there was Ida, which is how we got to know each other. I'm so glad that you've made this presentation. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Thanks, Sir Francis.
Your presentation was fascinating. I come from a reform background, and I just want to say that I think it's dangerous to assume that just because Rabbi Jacobs said something about his views on homosexual relationships a little while ago, he would have had the same views today. And it's also quite difficult just to go back and look at those views and accept them as authority today.
I totally agree, but I'm looking back from what he was saying then, and also what he would not do is he would not stick his head out on its own, the same as Gunnar and the other issues. It has to be done with orthodoxy. I mean, this is a unique chance for people in the same authority to try and work with modern orthodoxy to find a way to deal with this problem. It is a tremendous problem. It has to be solved. So it's not just a matter of, say, one section doing something on its own, because it does affect Claudius Sorel. It affects us all. I know Rabbi Lopatkin is involved in issues like this in America, and it's got to happen. I think the authority just jumped the gun. Instead of working with other people, they decided to make a statement on their own.
Well, it was a reform of liberals.
Well, yeah.
Which do you think was a bigger loss to the community, that your father never became chief rabbi, or that he didn't become principal of Jews College?
Well, the point is, you see, I think that would have been the stepping stone. If he would have been principal of Jews College, I'm sure, unless a lot of things had happened, he would have been chief rabbi. So the two could have happened. You know, it was 45 years, so somebody's career doesn't become stuck in 45 years. Anything else? Otherwise we have to finish now. Thanks very much indeed for coming. If you are around tomorrow, it should be an interesting session, especially as Ian is there, may also speak. His father was